the News Channel 5 network, this is MorningLine with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Monday. And as you're probably aware, last week we rolled tape shows, of course, because we had a tornado or many tornadoes. And I certainly hope wherever you're watching and joining us from this morning, you are okay. And obviously the recovery effort continues. Tennessee strong, Nashville strong, Mount Juliet strong, and we'll continue our coverage on all of that. But we're back live with a program this morning. And I think it's something that can even touch a little bit on what we're dealing with right now, the subject matter today, but it's going to be focusing on some of the cases with regard to missing or unidentified persons, oftentimes involved with criminal cases. And you can think just off the top of your head, most recently, the case of Evelyn Boswell. Now we know they believe they found her remains, and that's a relatively new case, but we have other cases we'll talk about as well. The Joe Clyde Daniels case out of Dixon County, that little boy still missing now, nearly 2 years come April ago. Also, Tabitha Tudor's. How cases like this are handled, how oftentimes they can be solved, but it's years, maybe decades later. We'll get into that. Take some of your phone calls as well with our guest this morning. He's an expert with a very unique, I think, career path. Todd Matthews is with us this morning. Good morning to you,
Good morning.
Todd.
Nice to meet you guys again.
Todd reminded me, and it's come back to me, that I first interviewed him several years ago with the case involving Bruce Mendenhall, who now is serving life in prison for two murders, and I think law enforcement in general believe he's a serial killer.
Yes.
A serial killer, and you were involved in that with regard to, I guess you came into play with Mendenhall because there were unexplained murders, and then when he was found, what did they have you do with that?
Well, basically, that was still when I was in the volunteer community.
Yeah.
So it was just pulling together different information, passing it on to media, law enforcement. So just kind of tying up some loose ends and matching things
There were so many
together.
on that, and a scary case.
There were, and when you work in this and you see this stuff every day, even as a volunteer, you do see patterns emerge, and you can point out things, especially back in the day when there wasn't, that was 13 years ago.
Yeah.
There wasn't so many people doing this back in the day, so some of that stuff was pretty new.
That stuff's really, of course, come into vogue with television, entertainment,
Yes.
TV, and so much of that in CSI and all of these things about solving cold cases. Now, remind folks, you're no longer with NamUs.gov.
Yes.
But okay, you're a former director of case management and communications. Talk about what that organization does.
So I was on the working group to help develop the NamUs program years ago. That was back in 2007 when you caught me at the airport. I was heading in to actually be part of the working group.
Sure.
Ultimately, it led into more and more. I became a regional program specialist right after that, and then ultimately at the University of North Texas, I become a director of communication and
that group
marketing.
does what?
They actually are the national repository for missing and unidentified persons.
Okay.
So that's the main thing, and they provide forensic services at no cost. Dental, DNA, fingerprint analysis, victim services unit. There's so many things that they provide, but doing this job at that role is almost impossible remotely. You're going to have to be in that building at the University in Fort Worth, and that's just simply something that I can't do.
Yeah, you're a Tennessee guy.
And then there's other opportunities. I'm 50 this year. I'll be 50 in May, and there are things that I wanted to do. I want to tell some of the stories. I want to do different things.
There's so many of them. Just off the top of your head, how many names are probably in that database? I mean, how many missing?
At least 17,000 missing persons.
Nationally.
And there's more. There's more than that. I know there's a lot of cases that are not in there. In several states I worked, Tennessee being one of the first to help pass state law requiring the use of NamUs. So in Tennessee, as of 2 years ago, I worked with the state capitol, John Mark Wendell, Paul Bailey. We passed a law in Tennessee that requires the entry into NamUs after 30 days of being missing. And I will say that I've not seen that really come to the fruition that it could.
Yeah.
And it's really not that hard.
These cases could be solved if more of that's done.
Yeah, if the forensic services are applied. So there are a lot of cases yet in Tennessee that have not had dental DNA and fingerprint. They've not yet been entered into the national database. Which, and I think it is, part of that is there was no assigned responsibility with the law. So there was nobody that says, you do this, you do that. I did work in New Mexico, and we did make it more specific. I did work with a local advocate, and there was assignment more of who should be doing what. And I think the responsibility falls to the most local agency. the PD or the SO, I think they should be the ones reporting it to TBI and making sure it's in the national database. And the families can do it too. The families can do the primary entry into the NamUs database.
And basically what goes into the database is what? Just details about that missing person?
Yes, just basic details, and
appearance,
then somebody, height, weight, eye color, everything. And then somebody with the NamUs staff will vet that, validate it with local law enforcement, and the case will be published and shared. And you can take public tips. That happens every day. Those are shared. And then automation. The DNA will go into CODIS.
Yeah.
So, and that's free. It doesn't cost the family anything.
Okay.
And there could be a cold hit based on that. So,
see, that's the thing. The internet, online, it's just opened up so many opportunities now that decades ago weren't there. Now, let me ask you this. You live in the Cookeville area, and one of the first questions I asked him was, I hope he was okay through the storms. But you said you were, which I'm glad to hear. But beyond that, I'm just curious how some of this type of work, you said there can actually be some links to what we're doing now in the aftermath of the tornado damage that relate to the work you do?
So many things with a missing persons event like this. NamUs is actually creating a critical incident component that would handle something like a tornado, even a terrorist attack or mass fatality, coronavirus. So there's going to be a component that's powered by NamUs that will be called critical incident that will allow facilitation. So it's going to help coordinate when there are large numbers of displaced or missing people. But there's even so much more. The missing and unidentified situation in the United States has been called the silent mass disaster. And that's because I've used tornadoes as an analogy before, and we just experienced it together. Look at how that community came together. Everybody helped her. The community stopped. Factories closed. Everybody helped each other. Now, what if my wife wasn't missing in a tornado, but she's just missing?
That wouldn't happen. Yeah, it's not the same reaction.
It's not,
right.
And that's why they call it the silent mass disaster, because of space, time, distance, and the world goes on.
Now, initially in Putnam County, as you know, there were as many as 80 people missing.
Yes.
They've now all been accounted for one way or the other. Now that's the effort to identify and find them. I mean, they were just out looking, or hopefully some of them who had survived it called in and said, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Talk about a little bit about that. In the critical moments after a tornado, does what you do come into play in terms of identifying whether or not someone's alive or dead, or if there's someone who's okay?
Not initially. Usually that's led to the most local agency,
right.
And something like a national database would come into play after a period of time, after local resources are exhausted, or it's time to bring in other people, like if there's unidentified remains that are found. But a lot of people, we knew who were missing, and they knew generally the bodies are among that group of people. But it was concerning. I did know my son was actually he was part of the relief effort because his place of work was downtown in Cookeville at the area where this happened, and I worried because I knew he hadn't had that type of training. So I worried that maybe he might grab something, something that could electrocute him. So it was scary, because then there was nothing you could do about it. I mean, we were all responding. People couldn't call in because their cell phones weren't working. I couldn't call him because I couldn't get a line out to him. And literally in the parking lot where he works, they erected a mobile, tower so that they could restore call services. But it was really hard. You couldn't call anybody. And I heard a lot of young people say, even my son, my youngest son, was going to go out. He had a friend that had stayed late in the night, and they were going to take off around the time the storm was starting. He goes, they always say it's going to be bad, and it never happens. So I think they're a little desensitized, like, yeah, I heard it before. I've lived around here long enough. We've seen it before. Yeah, I've seen it happen before, and I think maybe we're over-preparing people at times, and they're just not listening. That's kind of like the alerts with missing children. I hear so many of them, and then they're over before you actually get a chance to react to them.
What do you mean over? That they're
recovered, they're resolved.
Okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to take some calls. Diana and others, if you're there, the line's open. You can give us a call. If you're on hold, stay there. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the most recent Amber Alert, and that was the one involving Evelyn Boswell, and get your take on what maybe they're going to learn now that they found the remains and what that means, because that's a huge case, and a lot of people make comparisons between this case and Casey Anthony's case, and it's not there yet, but people, theorize. We may learn more today. We'll get more into that with our guest and take your phone calls. Stay with us. As you see, we're talking about unidentified and missing persons cases. 17,000 nationwide. We'll be back, maybe more, right after this.